Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CH Tribe's exclusive event, Career Accelerator Sundays. I'm Pallavi, your student community manager at cleverharvey, and over the course of the next 6 weeks, I shall be taking you through a series of sessions to clarify all your concerns regarding overseas education. So now we understand how nerve-wracking it can be for parents when it comes to making the right decisions about the child's education. We know that making the right career choices needs commitment, support, and resources. And that's exactly what the CH Tribe is all about. With me today, we have 3 panelists who shall be addressing all the important aspects when it comes to deciding between studying in the US and in the UK. Well, to begin with, we have Ms. Madhavi Desai from Madhavi Desai Consulting. Ms. Madhavi holds a master's degree from Purdue University in the US and was the one to pioneer education consulting in India to go on to create the first ever counseling firm in our country. Wow, isn't that awesome? Several universities worldwide regularly fly her to their institutes, expressing their research programs, pedagogy, and facilities. Despite that, Ms. Madhavi chooses not to tie up with any particular university and remains unbiased in all her guidance, helping students match up with the universities best suited for them. So welcome, Madhavi, and we are so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, likewise.
Next, we have our founders, Madhu Agrawal and Sriram Subramaniam. Madhu graduated from Warwick University in the UK and Sriram graduated from Brown University in the US. They both are entrepreneurs and the directors of cleverharvey and Calido Learning. So welcome, Madhu, and welcome, Ram.
Thanks, Pallavi.
Let's kickstart the first session of the Career Accelerator Sundays. So we have picked out a list of questions central to our discussion today, and here it goes. The very first question is to you, Madhu. How do cost and financial aid differ? Also, can I get any sort of scholarships if we plan to admit myself in the US or in the UK universities? Over to you, Madhavi.
So first thing to keep in mind, thumb rule, that there is no funding available in the UK. I've been 32 years into counseling. I've helped 27,691 children. And in these 32 years, I saw one scholarship come from the UK. Well, as the United States, there's abundant money. There's money to be claimed at the undergraduate level, at the master's, what they call graduate level, and PhD level. So there is no money and there is money. USA is flush with funds.
Thank you so much. And now we move upon to the next question, and we would want Ram to answer that for us. So Ram, tell us, how do the degree durations differ between US and the UK universities? Also, is the length of study for bachelor's or master's different in the US and the UK? And if it is, am I missing something with the short-time course? Over to you, Ram.
Actually, going back to the previous question that you had asked about the differences in the costs of studying in the US and the UK, I think a lot of that has to do with the duration of the programs in both places. So if it's all right with you, I'll just bring up a quick visual which sort of illustrates these differences. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, we have the program costs for the US. US degrees typically end up costing anywhere between $45,000 to $60,000 per year. This is including the cost of staying in the US, which varies considerably between where you are in the US. If you're in a place like LA or New York, it gets significantly more expensive. So that's the per year costs are broadly the same. In fact, living costs in London, if you're in the UK, might even be slightly higher than most parts of the US. Having said that, the UK degrees are largely 3-year degrees at the undergrad level. US degrees tend to be 4-year degrees. So that alone accounts for most of the difference in costs in studying between the two. In the US, there's the possibility of accelerating your 4-year degree into a 3-year degree. And Ms. Madhi, definitely feel free to let me know if I'm missing anything here, because I'm writing all of this largely based on my own experience of having been in the US. So I know that your breadth of expertise is far wider. So the 4-year degree can usually be accelerated to a 3-year degree in the US if you bring in credits. Your academic credits from, let's say, an IB program or an advanced placement exam can help you skip a few credits. And if you can skip enough, and if you take some summer courses, you can finish a degree in 3 years. I've had a couple of friends who do that. But having said that, that's the exception, not the rule. The average US undergrad degree is 4 years compared to 3 in the UK.
That was awesome, Ram. I think most of the parents would be having this question as a very common question before getting their child enrolled into any kind of courses in either of the universities. So thank you, Ram, for sharing that with us. Let's move on to our next question. So this one's for you, Madhu. How do academic options differ at US universities and the UK universities?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference that I see between the two systems is the flexibility, the kind of flexibility you have in the US. So when you're going to a US college, they don't require you to come in and apply to a specific program. They're looking for you to come in, spend up to 2 years exploring lots of different domains, and then coming to a choice on what is it that you really want to do, and then specializing in that or picking your major and then picking a minor alongside that. Mm-hmm. In the UK, it's very different. It's a lot closer to the Indian system. It's a lot more traditional. So you have to choose right up front what degree you're going to be in. And alongside that choice, then there are only specific subjects that you can take. So for example, if you're taking a business management degree, you don't have the flexibility to say, oh, I want to do 2 programs from psychology or, 2 credits from like languages. So to me, it boils down to what is the person's interest and what are they looking for? For example, when I was going to university, I wasn't really sure about which domain I really wanted to be in. I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to study law, but I also wanted to be able to keep in touch with understanding the business and economic side of things. And there were very limited options to allow me to tailor make a path that lets me explore these 2 fields. Whereas in the US, a US college would allow you to mix and match across lots of different fields and have a very wide range of exposure and a very wide range of subjects that you could develop expertise in. But I also think there's pros and cons, because I know friends who feel like the US system is sometimes so wide that you can get lost. In that, if you're not sure of what you want to do, you can really get lost looking at lots of different options and graduate with no clear focus in what you have developed expertise in. Whereas in the UK, it's tailored such that when you graduate at the end, you will definitely have a degree in one specific subject area, which makes it a lot easier than when you're going out there to look for what industries you want to work in or what employment options you've got available.
Awesome. That was really great to know, Madhu. Thank you so much. So now we move on to one of my favorite questions to Madhavi. So Madhavi, tell us, how do pedagogy styles differ at universities in both the countries?
Ram, thank you very much. First of all, this is fantastic having this in front of, so everybody can take a photograph and refer to these points as we go down the talk. So pedagogically, you will find the UK, like Ram has already explained, is very close to the Indian system. That's where we predominantly got our pedagogy. We aped and imitated the Brits as they lived here for so many years. And so it's very, very what we call, a little bit Socratic, where you keep quiet, I'm the boss, I know it all, don't argue with me. And if you argue with me, it could result in poor grades. That always lurks behind us, right? That's why we are always brown-nosing and currying favor with teachers. I've studied here and I've studied in the US. And the kind of experiences I've had in the US, it doesn't surprise me that there is so much excellence in that country, because you can have an unheated, non-heated argument with your professor if you don't agree on an academic point. And they're gracious enough to say, you know what, I don't agree with you, Madhavi, but let me get back to you. Let me do some homework and get back to you. And no offense taken. And nobody's yelling and screaming, of course, at each other. But the beauty is the inquiry method. They allow questioning. That is the beauty. In India, you mug up everything, you go spit it out. If you don't get the exact sequence of words correct, you are marked down. The difference in the US is the professor sets the syllabus, professor teaches the syllabus. The professor sets the tests and exam papers, and the professor corrects it. There's total accountability for your academia. Now, in India, you have the government educational council will declare the syllabus. Some other Johns will set the papers, and some guy who's paid 51 rupees corrects your paper. Your whole life depends on that. So you see the disconnect between the pedagogies. One is inquiry and one is total accountability in the United States. In UK, there are question marks. Also in the US, very strong research. In the UK, there is not enough money for research because UK doesn't have the deep pockets that the United States does. I mean, we do know USA is a $20 trillion economy. UK is a 2 trillion approximately, or under 3 trillion. So needless to say, the trickle down of their coffers are very dry in the UK, and the US is flush with funds. I'll give you one example here. Interesting. University of Texas at Austin. It's so incredible. They have so much land. They have UT Austin, they have UT Dallas, UT blah, blah. They have so much land that I still remember in the 1980s, I was there as an exchange student for high school. I had a Rotary scholarship. They found oil on their property. They don't know what to do with the money. Their endowments are enormous. So there is unlimited supply of money for research.
I think having been in the US in the undergrad system for 4 years, I think that's absolutely spot on. In the pedagogy especially is extremely self-directed. So I know that there were some classes, some large lectures of 200 plus people, some small seminars of maybe 20 students in them, which were very discussion based. But broadly, the accountability systems were geared towards being self-accountable. So we used to have homework submissions for many classes where the professor would just say, you know what, by the end of the day, just drop this off in my mailbox. And people would sort of take advantage of that sometimes. I know a lot of students from India would say, if I can just drop it off in the mailbox anytime, I can just, as long as I can drop it off, before the professor gets to it, I can sort of get that default extension on my papers. They didn't care about that at all. The professors didn't care about that at all because they were like, if you're cheating on the system, you're really only cheating yourself. To me, that was the quintessence of studying in the US, which is extremely self-directed. You can take out of it whatever you want to take out of it. If you're not, as a student, disciplined or motivated enough to follow the rigor of the system, they're not going to impose it on you. We used to have classes where students would sit in the back on their laptops, drinking a Coke and, having their breakfast along with the class. The professor was totally cool with that. They didn't see that as a personal affront or any of that. You could leave the class whenever you wanted to. You could come in whenever you wanted to. And obviously, out of respect, people would, try and abide by the timings. But if you didn't, that wasn't seen as disrespectful to the professor. They very much believed that the education was being provided, for the student's sake, and student can take whatever they want out of it. The lack of spoon feeding, I think that's a key part of the pedagogical approach as well. They used to have this thing called office hours, where for a couple of hours every week, every professor in every department would be available. You could literally drop in and speak with Nobel laureates. You could drop in and speak with someone who's advising the US government on something. And these are just people who have their office doors open. So you can literally walk up, knock on the doors. Even if you're not taking a class with them, you could just hang out with them for half an hour. So I think that actually leads to people taking a lot of ownership of what they want to study. So in my case, for example, going back to what Madhu was saying about having a lot of choice at the undergrad level. I had 2 years to declare my major at the college that I was at. That's not normal. I think it's usually a year or year and a half, but 2 years is quite a lot of time. So for 2 years, I literally didn't have to tell them what my concentration or major was going to be. And I knew going in that I was interested in economics, but I still ended up, exploring very widely in the humanities and the liberal arts. I took a number of classes for languages, for French, Sanskrit, Urdu. I took a number of classes in political philosophy, history, number of classes in psychology, classes in medieval history, medieval studies. None of that were actually related to economics, which is my major. But I think in the long term, in the course of my development, I think it's contributed quite significantly to being able to see that all bodies of human knowledge work in the same way. And I think it leads to a very rich development of the learning experience. That said, I think as Madhu said also, it did lead to a little bit of confusion for me. So I graduated with a degree in economics. It was great. The process was fantastic. Out of my 32 classes, I think about 20 classes were in economics. But having graduated at the end of it, I was sort of left wondering, okay, now what do I do now with this? Do I want to go into consulting? Do I want to go into finance? Do I want to go into maybe banking? Any of the other number of sectors that people would come into recruit for. So I think that the wide variety of exposure was great. But if I had a little bit more clarity going in that these were the kind of sectors that I was interested in, maybe a lot of my internships that I would have chosen during the summer breaks would have been more coherent and pointed towards that. I think that's one of the key takeaways there.
So Ram, I wish you had met me before you went. Okay, so what I wanted to also share in keeping with what Ram was talking about the pedagogy, what is incredible is the number of times as a teaching assistant, I've conducted exams, I've conducted tests, I've given the test papers and walked out of the room and come back later just to collect it. And there is honor code that children follow. There will be nobody doing rubbernecking and saying, what do you think? Nobody will whisper, nobody will talk. Everybody will do their exam quietly without cheating. And that is incredible, in keeping with what Ram was saying.
Absolutely, yes.
How self-motivated they are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Ram, and thank you, Madhu, for answering that question. We've got the next question to you only, Madhavi. On what points do admission processes differ at, both the universities?
So the US admission process is a little complicated because they want to see a student holistically. They want to see the academics, of course. Then they have entrance tests that I think everybody's heard of, like the SAT, American College Test, the ACT. You can take either or. Correct. They will want an English requirement, a test requirement from Asia, because we are technically a non-English speaking country. They'll ask you multiple questions. It could be write about 3 accomplishments in your life, write about a moment in time where you realize something, write about a bad experience that changed something in you. So they ask very, very, insightful questions to this. They want to get to know the student. Then they want 3 teachers who will send recommendation letters. So what happens is typically, I'll give you an example. Let's take a university like my son's university, Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt gets annually roughly 35,000 applications a year for 1,500 seats. 35,000 for 1,500. Now, obviously, the admission committee does not have time to read 35,000 applications. What they do is, on the basis of your SAT, ACT, and your marks from 9th standard, 9, 10, 11, 12, they will shortlist, let's say, 3,000 children. Once you're in the shortlist, it doesn't matter if Madhu is 92%, Pallavi is 89%, and I'm 84%, because we made the cut equally. After that, Pallavi will be surprised that Madhavi got admission. Why didn't I? Is because I had a story which grabbed them, because the way I built my resume. So it's a very complex process. So we start building resumes for children right from age 12 up. We do mentoring, right? Now, let's take a look at the UK system. UK is you fill one form, write one essay, and you can only pick one major. In USA, you don't have to pick only one major. In the UK, you pick only one major, and there's only one essay. So you have to customize it to that. I want to study economics. Why? And you are allowed to apply only to 5 colleges. In the US, you can apply to unlimited number of colleges. And UK, it's very clear. They want your final year marks. So they beyond the point, they don't care what you've done before. This is at the undergrad level. So, they don't look at you as a whole. They don't see your community service, or if you've done things which are extraordinary and taken on more challenging things besides your academics. Are you a national player in a sport? What? So they are not really interested. They're just concerned with the bottom line. What are your marks? And if you have these marks, you qualify. So that's the glaring difference. It's very similar to India. You have to have 92.2 to go to Xavier's, or you need to have 89.9 to go to Jai Hind. It's a bit like that.
Correct. Got it. Super. Well, we've got the next question coming up for you, Ram, again. So what sort of lifestyle or living condition can be expected by the students opting to study in London? Since we know the weather in London, quite unpredictable. So could you just, explain how it goes?
The living experience for a student in the UK depends quite heavily on where they are in the UK. So if they're in London, then I think that's a completely different experience for them compared to being out, let's say, anywhere in Wessex, anywhere in the north. And I think largely that's to do with how international London is. I think it's probably one of the most cosmopolitan cities, if not the most. It's obviously got influences from all over the world. I mean, the Brits at some point were famous for an empire where the sun didn't set upon that. So you can still see that in the culture of London. I've lived in London for about 3.5 years, and I absolutely fell in love with the city. I think being a student there is amazing. And it doesn't have that much to do with the university experience as much as the experience of being in a large metropolitan city. On the other hand, being in the UK, you probably have to deal with quite a lot of terrible weather, actually. It's raining almost all the time. Not in anyone's control, but it really affects people's moods. A lot of the socializing happens in in pubs or bars or anywhere indoors where they don't have to be out in the rain. I'm sure it's slightly different further up north in the UK. There's probably a lot more snow. In the US, there's obviously going to be a wide variation because geographically the US is made up of extremes. There's extreme sort of heat in the southeast towards Florida. There's the northeast is very cold. The Midwest is bitterly cold, which is a whole different category from the very cold of the northeast. The West Coast is actually very balmy, very sunny. So the climate varies quite a bit in the US. Probably the part of the US that's most similar to the UK is maybe the Northwest around Seattle, where it again rains pretty much throughout the year. The campus life in both places actually tends to be quite vibrant. In the US, I know that a smaller percentage of the class is typically made up of international students, maybe about, I would say, between 8 to 10%. But there's a lot of activities that happen on campus, intramural sports. I've seen people just tossing around frisbees for hours on the lawns outside the classes. A lot of the lifestyle is very inspired by pop culture in the US. People go to Comic-Con, people go to rock concerts that show up at campuses. Typically, the stadiums at campuses become venues for these concerts. Depending on where you are in the US, sports plays a huge role. So if your university sports team is sort of in the running for the College Cup, they take that quite seriously in many places. So a lot of the campus life comes down to how well you're able to integrate with American society in many ways. It's typically self-contained. There is not a whole lot of stuff that happens where you interact with people outside of the campus if you're in the campus environment. That's obviously different if you're in some place like NYU, which is a city campus. There obviously you'll encounter a lot of people from outside of the campus. I think it's pretty much the same in the UK. I think the student life is very vibrant, with the exception that a lot of the outdoor activities get curtailed because of the rain. But I think there is a wide sort of variety of people in the UK as well that you can sort of socialize with comfortably. You're able to build friendships that will last you your lifetime. The campus life is probably the most underrated part of choosing a college. I think most people don't appreciate it. I don't know if you agree with me, Ms. Madhavi, but I think the college experience is largely determined by what you get out of it from your peer interactions. And most people end up choosing on the basis of rankings, which I think is absolutely not representative. So to give you an example, a place like Brown, where I was at, literally nobody would ever ask you for, what you scored on a particular test. No one cares. You, your roommate, all taking different courses. Even people in the same class, in the same course, don't really care what you scored on your test. Not very competitive at all. Very sort of socially liberal. Everyone there is experimental in some way or the other. Unlike some place like, say, Princeton, which I really, really wanted to get into when I applied, which is extremely competitive, extremely academically oriented. People will sort of refuse to share their homework with someone else. People will do a lot of sneaky things to make sure that their hard work, others don't take advantage of it. Stuff like that didn't exist on our campus at all. So the cultures differ very widely between student communities across the US. Probably one of the most underrated factors, I think.
I think just to add to that, one of the other big differences in the US and the UK is because of the size of the campus and, like Madhavi was saying earlier, the kind of land and just the resources available in the US universities. Your first year, when you go to the US as a student, I think it's a bit of a softer landing. So you've got accommodation on campus. There's typically food plans available. When you land in the UK, it's a very, very quick transition to being very independent and responsible for yourself, because universities will have limited on-campus accommodation. Usually in your first year, you will get on-campus accommodation, but you won't have things like a meal plan. It's incumbent upon you to figure out how you're going to manage your meals and, whether you can cook or whether you can afford to spend on eating out all the time. And then second year onward, you pretty much always have to be living off campus. So that means then having to find a house, figure out your roommates, deal with rent agreements, deposits, and just being an adult really, really quickly. Whereas in the US, you will continue to have campus accommodation for quite a while. Outside of just academics, the level of responsibility on your shoulders and the speed with which you need to cope with even life is different in the UK than it is in the US.
Great. That was superb. Thank you, Madhu and Ram. And I'm sure others will definitely benefit greatly from this information. So I would want Madhu to answer the next question for me. Madhu, the question is, what are the exams one needs to take to get into UK university to pursue a field in probably business, law, finance? And what is the difficulty level of those exams?
A lot of this is very university specific. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you want to be pursuing a law degree at the undergraduate in the UK, you can't do that in the US. In the US, you can only do it at the master's level. But if you want to pursue a law degree, you need an exam called the LMAT. but not all universities need an LNAT. You need to see which ones do. At the moment, I think UCL, LSE, Oxford, and Cambridge need it. The others do not. Then, if you want to pursue sciences, some universities will have a requirement that you're doing, maths at a certain level, you're doing physics at a certain level. Even if you want to pursue economics, and this surprised me because I wanted to get an economics degree, but math is a requirement. So I would suggest if you're looking at any specific program and you have a specific university in mind, look at that specific university's requirement for that specific program, because some of them might have requirements for a certain subject at a certain level of advancement, and you don't want to be caught out later on, because if that's a hard requirement, it will just shut off that option for you.
Thank you, Madhu, for answering. I've got the same question to you, Madhavi, but then this time we would want you to answer us about the US universities.
So business degrees at the master's level will require either a GRE or a GMAT. So many, many years ago, they would only want the GMAT for the business schools. But then they opened it up because there are a lot of engineers that go with a GRE, which is still a valid score after they graduate and probably work for 2 years in America and then choose to do the MBA. So either or works. Those are the exam requirements. Then top US business schools, I'll just finish talking about business schools first. Business schools require anywhere from 2 to 5 to 6 years of work experience if you want to go to what they call the M7, the top 7. So those who are looking at aspiring to some of the top schools, of course, great GMAT scores, great undergraduate bachelor's scores, and work experience. And for those of you who are weighing why US versus other countries for the MBA, keep this in mind. The genesis of the MBA is in the United States. 1881 is when Joseph Wharton started the first business school in the world. Okay? And distinctly, the British laughed at the Americans and they made a joke out of it in Europe saying, oh my God, will the Americans not stop at anything? They want to teach people how to make money in a classroom. And of course, the Americans have their eyes on their goalposts, not flinching, they carry on. And 1881 till World War II, not only did they have these business schools like Wharton, Harvard, Chicago, all came into being, but all these schools also were war strategy advisors for World War I and World War II to governments. So that's why the American business schools have a different edge. I mean, they have this killer edge to it. So if you're going to spend your money, first think of US business schools, even at the undergrad level. And of course, the island monkeys, as we call them in America, the Insulafe, in German word for island monkeys, the Brits, ran with their tail between their legs almost 80 years later, go to the US and say, please teach us how to set up business schools. So be a little judicious before you go to rank 2, 3, 4. If you want to go to the UK, London Business School, LBS, full stop, and then look at the United States. So it's better that you're at rank 7 in America than you're in rank number 2 in the UK, because they just can't catch up. The gap is quite wide. So that's about business schools. Now, talking about law, in the US, you have to have a bachelor's degree. Then you do the LSAT entrance exam, and then you apply for the 3-year Juris Doc, JD, as they call the degree there. And I would recommend anybody doing law in the United States, because if you're an Indian passport holder, you'll never, ever get a job in the US. In my 32 years as a counselor, and I've already told you, I've helped over 27,000 children. I know only 2 people who managed, because they were so super brilliant, they managed to get jobs in the United States. Now, US law, just to conclude, every state, after you finish becoming a lawyer, you have to qualify to practice in a state. So New York State, you have to qualify. So you do an entrance exam, you do that exam. California has its own exam. So it can be very, very tough. Forget law in the United States. However, there may be some of you here who are doing law at the undergrad level in India, LLB, and you choose to do LLM in the United States. It's a 1-year program. You can do the LLM and you still catch the first plane home. Then you say, why would I go then if I can't get a job there? It's for your exposure, plain vanilla exposure. And so I think finance comes under business school. So I've already talked about B school. Now, one thing I want to go back to the MBA degree, whatever information I gave you, you want to be very careful when you're applying for a master's in business. Business school has multiple degrees. It has the Bachelor's of Business, BBA. It has the MBA, Masters of Business. It has a Master's of Finance, Masters of Marketing, Masters of HR, Human Resources. And it, of course, offers the same PhD. So you could do a PhD in finance after a master's in finance. So please understand that you don't mistakenly take up a MS degree because, again, getting a job after the MS can be quite dodgy, quite tricky in the United States.
Thank you. That was really insightful, Madhavi. We have the next question lined up for Ram. So Ram, tell us what are the scope and options to get a job there after the completion of a particular course?
So for international students, I think the key things to keep in mind are the visa regulations that are applicable to them. In the US, you automatically get a 1-year OPT, that's optional practical training, where they allow you to work just like anyone else for a full year. And that gets extended to 3 years if you're a STEM graduate. So if you've done your major in any of the science, technology, engineering, mathematics streams, you get an automatic 3-year extension on your OPT. I think that's the key thing to keep in mind. There's not a lot of other restrictions. I mean, broadly, you kind of have to work in the field in which you graduated in, but they interpret that in a very wide way. Most companies, once you work there for maybe a couple of years, will be able to sponsor your H-1B, which then allows you to work there even past your OPT. On the UK side, you get a 2-year post-study work permit. The restrictions on this are slightly more though. You have to have a job by the time you graduate. I think that in itself ends up disadvantaging a lot of the international students because they're in a full-time course. They're doing probably their final semesters. They're finishing off, honors dissertations, any of that, which keeps them busy. But also by the time they graduate, they need to have a job offer in hand, which pays them above a certain reference amount. And that job can't be in a field that's unrelated to what you study. So you can't say study economics and then end up in a science job. They need to pass a slightly higher bar as well. I think this was true when the UK was part of the EU. It's no longer part of the EU, but back then they used to have a requirement that they can't fill that position from anywhere else in the EU before they offer it to someone international. I'm not really sure how that's changed with the UK leaving the EU. Broadly, those are the regulations. I think beyond the regulations, it's also to do with how proactively your college decides to sort of invite companies to campus for recruiting from campus, how well they've networked themselves, with the local companies. So a lot of the job interviews that I had sat for example, were companies that just came to campus as part of a recruitment drive. That happens in the US. You're not guaranteed to find a job there. It's not like the placement process in India. It's slightly looser than that. It's slightly more voluntary. But there is a concerted effort to bring companies in who want to recruit from your campus.
So I was just going to say, I think it really boils down to how proactive you are. Because unlike India, where placement cells, it's almost, seen as a college responsibility to make sure that you land a job after you finished your degree. Overseas, in both the UK and the US, it's on your shoulders, guys. And you've got to remember one thing, that anytime that you are in a foreign country, you are more expensive as an employee than a local person. Because the company not just has to pay you the salary, but they also have to bear the cost of getting you a visa and complying with the regulations of employing somebody who is not American or not British. So in some sense, to earn your spot, you've got to show them that you're better than what they can find locally, whether that's because of the skill set you bring to the table or your work ethic or even your contacts, even just the fact that you bring a different cultural profile to the table. But you do have to be a lot more proactive, and especially when the economy gets tough. I think when you're in an economy where it's more and more competitive to get a job. So Madhavi was saying earlier how it's very difficult getting jobs in the legal field, because in that field, there are always 20x more people who want to be a lawyer than those who actually can qualify and become a lawyer and get involved in these spaces. So right from day one, please don't forget, even if you see the local students chilling and spending all their time being at parties and not worrying about their grades, you need to make sure that you're on top of your academics. You need to make sure that you are actively getting out there, getting to understand what the industries look like, what fields you might be interested in. You are ensuring that you're building your profile in every way possible. And, that means not just getting good grades, but also actively volunteering, with different charities or getting involved in clubs at college or organizing events, but making sure that when in your third year is when you should start looking. So in your third year in the US and in your second year in the UK is when you should be starting the process of going out there and looking for opportunities that you have a lot to talk about, because they won't come and look at your CV and say, oh, good grades, excellent, come along. No, some places I did 3 rounds of interviews. And, the first will be like a test where they'll do a verbal reasoning test, they'll do a mathematical test. The second will be a test where they're looking at what skills can you display. So they'll ask you about things like, when have you had to deal with a challenging situation? When have you displayed leadership? Tell me about a time you had to work in a team and there was conflict and how you resolved it. And all these things, you only have examples to show when you've done lots of things outside of academics. So make sure that you're building up rich and relevant experiences right from day one and be really proactive. Okay. Most large companies will recruit from their intern pool. So don't think I'll just wait and get a job directly. Get very proactive in looking for internships, because that will be your avenue for talking about what you've learned and what you can do. But it's also the best way to say, hey, I've worked here for a while. You guys know me. You know how I work. I quite like this. Do you think you take me on full time when I graduate?
Thanks for bringing out those factual differences, Madhu and Ram. And as the concluding question, I would like to ask Madhavi, is there one that is better than the other overall? And which should I choose if I'm really confused?
Are you talking whether USA or UK are better than the other?
Yes.
I think if you just historically go down all that we've discussed, it's no brainer that US is a win-win situation. Just starting with simple job, no job, because everybody who invests this kind of money is looking to seek employment and get some experience before they go back to their home country. So while they say in the UK, you have a 2-year post-study work permit, where are the jobs? So I have known in my experience, and if I may just say my enormous experience, I've only known people in technology get jobs by and large. So if you're a computer major, computer science major, boom, you'll get a job. Or if you are an MBA from London Business School, I have had literally 1 and 2 who could not get into London Business School, but went to Oxford, the Said School of Business, and Cambridge. And they managed to get jobs in Europe, not in the UK, they manage. So overall, I would invest in the United States, hands down.
Awesome. So thank you, Madhavi, and your advice and guidance have actually been instrumental to a lot of students across the country. We are deeply honored to have you as the speaker on today's session. I appreciate the time that you've taken out to show us the ropes and ensure that proper guidance is provided to the future generation. I really thank you with all my heart, Madhavi. Thank you so much. So we do have certain questions lined up in the chat. So can you briefly explain the process of scholarships in the UK and the US? I think it's already displayed on the screen, but somebody has asked that the cost mentioned is an yearly cost, or here it is for the entire duration or annual?
This is the entire duration. This is the total cost. I've just taken the annual tuition in each place, plus added on the living expenses, which work out to about $1,000 a month, and translated that to rupees and multiplied by how many years the typical program is. So this is the total cost of a US undergrad education or a UK undergrad education. There's a range, obviously, but broadly falls into that spectrum.
We've got another question for all three, is what the question says. So what is your tip for UG applications on ECs or essays, or just as a whole?
Wow, that's not a question. That's a million questions. So when you're applying to the United States, like we explained to you earlier, and as Ram has put so succinctly, academics, portfolio, SAT, ACT, essays. So there's no one tip. I mean, this is a journey. So let me put it this way. When a student comes to me, and I have an organization, of course, it takes us from start to finish about 600 hours of work. So I don't have one single answer for you.
So yeah, I mean, I think what Madhavi is saying is right. It's very, very well-rounded. It's a lot of different things that go in there. But if there's one thing that I would say you've got to do is your essay's got to grab their attention. There are thousands of essays on their desk. And if your essay also begins with something really boring, I mean, I find in the first 3 sentences, if you haven't got their attention, you've probably lowered your chances significantly. So I'd always look at what do you have to say about yourself or about your view on the world that you can put out there in the first 3 sentences and make them think, oh, interesting person. I want to hear more about what they've got.
Like Madhu was saying, obviously any tips for undergrad is a very broad question, but talking specifically about applications to US colleges and what you can do to put yourself in the best position for those. Obviously, the strong grades matter. I think like Madhavi clearly said, the initial shortlist is based on your strong grades and your SAT scores or ACT scores. But beyond that, they're looking for some kind of coherence in what your interests are. So a lot of you guys, I think you guys are Clever Harvey alumni. You'll have done courses in entrepreneurship, done courses in finance in various fields. If you can, let's say, pick something like entrepreneurship as your core area of passion, if you can show not just that you've done courses in it, but you're studying it academically, you've actually started a venture while you're in high school, it's achieved a significant level of traction, it's been covered in the local newspaper. If you're able to prove that you're deeply passionate about that, if you've interned at a startup, if you've got a letter of recommendation from the founder, these are all things that would all sort of converge and point to saying, okay, this kid has an interest in entrepreneurship and a strong one at that. So that, in addition to strong grades and a high ACT score, would be, I think, a good fit, as opposed to where you did a lot of extracurriculars, but they were all pointing in different directions. I think in that case, it becomes a slightly harder decision for them.
So I think that briefly answers the question, even though it's a never-ending topic. We could just go on. Well, we've got the next question. Can you be more specific on work experience for B schools?
Okay, so the formula for business school work experience, if you want to get into the top 50 colleges, 50, see, the United States, remember, has about 700 business schools. So if you want to get into the top 50, you need a minimum of 2 years of work experience. And when you want to climb higher than 50, go to the 30s, let's say, you'll need 3+ years. Then you climb more, you will need 4+ years. So the M7 that I spoke about, my experience in the last decade has been that they're looking at least 5 years of multinational work experience, not family-held business. You can't work in a family-held company. And in the same breath, I want to share one data point with you. Those of you who are not able to get into a branded firm like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Ernst & Young, etc., keep in mind that the current head of Deloitte, the world head, is an Indian right now called Puneet Renjan.
Wow.
He went to a school called Willamette University, ranked 133 in the United States. So the point I'm making is the template of business school in the US is so fantastic. You could go to rank 133 and still become world head. So just keep these little data points in mind. And I'm not saying that nobody from a family health firm got into the top school. I'm not saying that. But by and large, if you don't come from, let's say you're Kumar Mangalam Birla, of course, you'll work only in your company, right? And then you'll go to, let's say, LBS. So those of us who don't have last names like Birla, Tata, Mahindra, then you have to look at working in branded companies.
We've got one question. So someone's asked, what's the cost for post-graduation? And in the US, since you've posted the UG costs?
Okay, so for when you say masters, it varies. Depends what masters you want to do, but it can go anywhere from $50,000 a year to $95,000 a year. Like the MBAs tend to be expensive, but if you went for a master's, let's say in mechanical engineering, you could get into a college which costs $50,000 a year, total cost, room, board, tuition, all of it.
Thank you. Well, I think we've come to the end of the session. Well, some fantastic insights, aren't they? So keep in mind, 27% of American graduates pursue a career in their field of study, and about 50% do the same in the UK. So it's extremely important for students to develop skill sets that are transferable across industries, as well as they have as many chances to firsthand experience different careers versus learn about them passively through research and conversations. As mentioned, Clever Harvey is India's largest career discovery platform, which lets students explore career in consulting, finance, marketing, designs, and many more, with company projects by Domino's, Taj, Kellogg's, Puma, to name a few. Stay tuned next week for the follow-up on study abroad, securing scholarships, SAT prep, and where to begin. Thank you all for coming, and we really do appreciate your interest in this very important discussion. Thank you all. Thank you so much.